Welcome to Kairos Conversations. This is a space for clinicians, leaders, and operators who are building in the aesthetic medicine space with intention. We take the data, the experience, and the real-world challenges of this industry and turn them into clarity you can actually use. I'm Taylor Siemens, nurse practitioner, operator, and founder of Kairos. I know that in this field, it's not just about what you do. It's about when you do it and how you lead through it. Let's dive in. Imagine charging $14 for something that only costs you $6. You'd think you were just printing money at that point, like you had uncovered some sort of ultimate business cheat code, you know? It sounds like a dream scenario. But in the $25 billion medical aesthetics industry, that exact math is, well, it's actively putting people out of business. It really is a phenomenal paradox because when you look at the raw data for medical aesthetics, you see this growth curve starting around 2010 that just sweeps relentlessly upward and projects this image of total invincibility. People see that overarching $25 billion projection, and they just assume that the rising tide is lifting every single boat. They assume it's this modern day gold rush. But you know, buying a pan doesn't mean you're going to strike gold, especially when the river is getting incredibly crowded. And that is the mission for this deep dive. We are taking off the hood of medical aesthetics, this industry, to see how the engine actually works. Last week, I was intended to give a presentation at the American Medical Spa Association Spa's annual conference. But due to a family emergency, I had to drop out. And I didn't want all of my work for that masterclass to end up in the presentation graveyard. So I am sharing the deep dive here with you. You know, I read last week that there are officially now more medical spas in the US than there are McDonald's, which is just wild to consider. But it actually makes this conversation more timely than ever because there are a lot of these like false narratives and pretenses when it comes to service selection or treatment menu development that I really was so eager to share for the conference. Now, my background. I am a nurse practitioner and I own a medical aesthetics practice. And I've built and managed multi-site aesthetics practices from the ground up for years. And the insights that we are discussing today are crucial right now because, well, like we said, the landscape is shifting right under our feet. And the days of simply opening a clinic, slapping a sign on the door, and just letting the novelty of these services drive traffic, well, those days are completely over. The novelty has entirely worn off, and you are dealing with an incredibly discerning customer base now. Patients know the tech, they know the specific brands of injectables, and they will absolutely shop around. So, okay. Let's unpack this. If the consumer is that educated, the margin for error for a practice owner, well, it drops essentially to zero. Which means before a clinic even thinks about opening its doors or like buying a single piece of equipment, they have to survive the first major filter, and that is treatment selection. Treatment selection dictates literally everything downstream. Your overhead, your staffing requirements, marketing spend, it all really stems from what you actually decide to offer your patients. And the most common and arguably the most fatal mistake new owners make is operating from a place of fear. Fear of turning away a single potential dollar. So they try to be everything to everyone. Man, it's really the 20-page dinner menu problem. Like if you've ever been to a restaurant, you walk in and they offer, sushi, tacos, lasagna, pancakes. Your immediate instinct is that none of it is going to be good because the kitchen is stretched way too thin. And in the aesthetic space, I like to break the entire industry down to 4 primary categories. So you've got injectables, skin, body, and wellness. And my mandate is pretty ruthless. When you are starting off, pick just 2. Just 2. Be excellent at 2. And the operational mechanics behind that pick 2 rule are just fascinating because, well, look, let's look back at the back office of that hypothetical restaurant we mentioned. They offer all of those random dishes. The kitchen has to stock hundreds of different perishable ingredients. The cooks have to constantly switch context into which style of food they're cooking, right? Which slows everything down. Now apply that to a medical practice, an aesthetics practice. If you try to offer full body contouring, advanced skin resurfacing, IV wellness therapy, and a full suite of injectables and longevity medicine. I mean, your inventory costs alone will crush you before you even treat your first patient. Okay, I know many of you are likely pushing back on that for just a second. So, sure, let's look at the other side of the coin here. Many of you are thinking, okay, but Taylor, if a patient walks in for Botox and they casually mention they're also looking for, say, body contouring, and I don't offer it, I'm literally watching cash walk out my door into the clinic down the street. How is that a winning strategy? Well, in my opinion, because capturing that specific dollar might actually cost you $5 in operational friction, right? To offer that body contouring, you had to buy a $100,000 device. You had to pay your staff to train on it. You have to allocate square footage in your clinic just to house the thing. And if it's not your core competency, that machine just sits idle 80% of the time. It is taking up expensive commercial real estate and bleeding into your capital. Space isn't free. By focusing on just two categories, say injectables and skin, you define your unique value proposition. You become the absolute authority in those areas, which allows you to optimize your inventory, streamline your staff training, and really build a highly targeted brand. You aren't distracted by the shiny new toy in a category that you don't even specialize in. You tighten the filter. But eventually, a successful brand does have to scale. And if you've mastered your two categories and you have the capital to expand, how do you cross the chasm without falling right back into the 20-page menu track? Well, in my opinion, what we do is we let the data dictate the expansion. And specifically, the data hiding right there in your own waiting room. My approach is to market research is localized. You don't need to commission some massive national demographic study. You just evaluate the breadcrumbs your current patients are already leaving you. I love this part. So we are looking at things like intake forms and consultation notes. We're going directly to our patients, the ones that we want to have and grow lookalike audiences, to see what else they are interested in. If you are dominating in the skin category with a specific laser treatment, what are your patients asking for during their downtime? Like, are they asking about vitamins or peptide stacks to speed up their healing or better prepare their system for the trauma of their treatment? Or are they asking about specific skincare lines to take home? If 80% of your laser patients are asking about a specific wellness add-on, well, that is no longer a guess. That is data that is driving your decisions. That is a guaranteed built-in consumer base for your next investment. And you can also leverage your vendors for this kind of intel, right? Like if you're moving a massive amount of a specific filler and your vendor's data might show that clinics with your exact demographic profile are seeing a huge spike in revenue when they pair that filler with a specific microneedling device. Well, in essence, you are just giving your patients, that lookalike audience of your patients, what they are practically begging for. It's all about building a logical ecosystem of treatments. You want things that naturally feed into one another rather than creating this Frankenstein monster of random services, which brings us back to the survival math. Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's say you've maintained your discipline. You've picked your lane. Now you have to face the cold, hard reality of your cost of goods sold, or COGS. And this is where the illusion of medical aesthetics profit margins just shatters for a lot of newcomers. Let's break down that $14 versus $6 paradox we opened with, because to anyone listening who runs a business, doubling your money on raw product sounds like an absolute dream. I tend to use the example of a neuromodulator. So the clinic buys the liquid for like $6.54 a unit, and they inject it. They charge the patient $14 a unit. And on paper, you're swimming in profit margin. It sounds foolproof, but that margin evaporates the literal second the patient sits down in the chair. Just like that, because you have to look at the holistic cost of that 30-minute appointment. The $14 doesn't just pay for the liquid in the syringe, it pays for the syringe itself and the gloves that your injector is using, the alcohol swabs, the gauze. It pays for the hourly rate of that highly trained practitioner who's actually administering the medication. And it pays for your awesome front desk staff, the receptionist who booked the appointment, and the software that they had to use to get it all done effectively. The electricity, keeping the lights on, the marketing that acquired the patient in the first place. The list goes on and on and on. I mean, don't forget the massive premium for your medical malpractice insurance. Yeah, when you subtract the physical supplies, the labor overhead, and the insurance from that $14, your actual net profit is dangerously thin. Dangerously. Wow. I mean, it is entirely a volume game. And this is the hidden danger of high revenue businesses. You could be grossing $3 million a year and still miss payroll if your COGS are out of alignment. My core lesson here is that you must maximize the value of the time that patient is in the clinic. If the margin on the raw injectables is that tight, you have to look at your service pairings. So if the liquid injectables have a razor thin margin, I'm guessing, well, maybe the hardware side of the business must be where the real money is made, right? Like if you buy a laser once and then every treatment after that is just pure profit. Well, what's fascinating here is that is the second great illusion of this industry. No. And it introduces a concept I warn about heavily, the hostage situation of consumables, the sneaky consumables. The business playbook that I laid out is completely fascinating because, well, it mirrors the printer ink business model. You can buy a fantastic printer for only $50 at any store, but you will spend $500 a year on their proprietary ink cartridges. It is that exact same mechanism, just scaled up to a $100,000 medical device. That's why a manufacturer might offer you an incredibly competitive upfront price on a body contouring machine or some other energy-based device. But the catch is that that machine requires a proprietary single-use attachment for every single patient. So you have to buy a new piece of plastic every time you turn it on. Or, and if this is one of the more restrictive cases, the machine has a digital lock and you literally have to buy credits from the manufacturer just to unlock the machine for a treatment. So you are essentially renting the machine that you already paid for. You bought it. You took on all the financial risk of securing the loan for the hardware, but the vendor guarantees himself a perpetual slice of your monthly revenue. Yep. And it destroys your ability to scale because if your disposable cost is fixed and high, your profit margin will always have a hard ceiling, no matter how efficient your staff becomes. You really can't. And my advice is to actively hunt for the devices that are designed with minimal upkeep and low COGS. You want the heavy capital expenditure to do the actual work without massive ongoing subscription fee disguised as a piece of plastic. Let's be honest here. You cannot outwork a bad contract. Okay, so if consumables are the recurring nightmare of a practice, the initial purchase is where that nightmare is born, which brings us to how practice owners actually acquire these machines. It requires stepping into the interrogation room with the vendors. And this is a phase where many highly skilled clinicians really stumble. Well, they are phenomenal medical professionals, but they haven't been trained in the high stakes of B2B purchasing. And these devices are massive capital investments that really can dictate the financial health of a clinic for many, many years to come. And I lean heavily on a golden rule here: buy nice or buy twice. It's a phenomenal heuristic. Temptation to cut corners is immense when you are staring down a $200,000 invoice for a top tier laser versus, say, I don't know, $60,000 invoice for a generic alternative. Sure, you'd want to save hundreds of thousands of dollars, but you have to run the failure scenarios. If the cheaper device breaks down twice as often, you aren't just paying for the repair. You are paying for the idle staff time. You are paying for the refunds of the angry patients whose appointments were canceled. And you are taking a massive hit to your local reputation, because who wants to rebook with a machine or a practice that just called them last week saying their machine was malfunctioning? Eventually, the operational chaos forces you to just buy the top tier machine anyways. Hence the rule: buy nice or buy twice. But even if you are buying the top tier machine, you can't just take the sales reps' ROI spreadsheets at face value, okay? Because those spreadsheets always assume a vacuum where the machine runs perfectly for 8 hours a day with zero friction. I have a gauntlet of questions that you have to put a vendor through before you ever sign a purchase agreement. And one of those items is that you must demand a demo. Seeing a glossy brochure is basically useless. You have to see how the machine actually integrates into the physical workflow of your clinic. Experience how the treatment feels, the downtime. Are your patients going to be willing to experience that? So let's dive into some of the specific landmines in my question checklist, starting with contraindications. You have to ask the rep, who exactly cannot be treated by this device? And this is where ROI models go to die. Let's say a vendor shows you a spreadsheet. And this is where ROI models go to die. Let's say a vendor shows you a spreadsheet proving you can make $10,000 a month with your new laser, but you fail to realize the laser is only cleared for skin types 1 through 3, right? And if your clinic is in a demographic or an area where 50% of your patients are skin types 4, 5, and 6, well, your addressable market just got cut in half. Whoa, that vendor's math right there. It might be technically correct, but for your specific clinic, the machine will be a financial disaster. This is such a critical detail. You also have to interrogate the training costs. Like, you buy the machine, they train your current staff for free, great. But staff turns over pretty often for a lot of practices. Nurses move, estheticians decide to open their own studios. And if the vendor charges $5,000 every single time you need to certify a new hire on that machine, your operational costs just skyrocketed because you are vetting a long-term partner, not making a one-off transaction, which is why the warranty structure is also absolutely critical. A very, very specific vulnerability: the post-warranty service cost. Let's walk through that, how it actually plays out in a clinic, and why this post-warranty period can be so dangerous. Because it's entirely unpredictable. Year 1, the machine is under a bumper-to-bumper warranty. It breaks, they fix it, no problem. It's easy, right? But year 2, if that warranty expires and you don't renew it, and suddenly the motherboard fries, no, okay? You get a quote from the manufacturer stating that the part alone is $12,000 and the specialized technician costs $200 an hour. And get this, you've got to cover the technician's flights and a hotel just to get them to your clinic. I hear of this story all of the time. A single post-warranty breakdown can wipe out an entire quarter's worth of profit from that machine. You have to negotiate the extended service tiers before they expire, before that company has the leverage. It is essentially a prenuptial agreement for a $250,000 laser. So what does all of this mean? Let's assume you survive the vendor negotiations, you avoid the consumable hostage traps, you define your unique value propositions, and you buy the perfect device. The machine is sitting right there in your pristine and beautiful clinic. Okay. None of it matters if the human element fails. That is exactly what it is. The machine is just metal and glass, right? It cannot generate a single dollar on its own. The technology is entirely bottlenecked by the expertise and, quite frankly, the engagement of the team members operating it. And there is a very human problem that those ROI spreadsheets just simply do not account for: boredom. In the reality of daily practice, doing the exact same filler technique or firing the exact same laser protocol 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, every single year, well, it leads to massive staff burnout. And boredom is a massive issue. And patients get bored too. If they see the exact same menu of services for 3 years straight, they just assume your clinic is falling behind the curve. That psychological stagnation is a quiet killer of aesthetic businesses. So to combat it, I recommend this annual planning cycle where you strategically introduce new services every quarter. It gives your team a new challenge to master and gives your marketing team a fresh narrative of ammunition to re-engage your patient base. But these don't have to be expensive services. It could be a new product or a new add-on to a service. But hold on, right? Because if the core rule of survival is avoiding the 20-page diner menu, how do we continually add new services every single year without eventually becoming a bloated, unfocused mess? Well, that is the tightrope walk of clinical management. You have to navigate the fine line between expansion and cannibalization. Cannibalization is such a vital concept here, okay? Let's explore how this actually breaks a business. Imagine you have a highly profitable skin tightening business using, I don't know, a radio frequency device. We'll call it RF device A. It's fully paid off. It's generating great margin, but you decide you need something new to keep your patients excited. So you buy RF device B. It does essentially the same thing, just a little bit differently. And your patients don't get twice as much skin tightening because of the new device. They just switch from booking device A to device B. So your overall clinic revenue stays completely flat. You just took out $80,000 of new debt to buy the second machine. Wow. I mean, you cannibalized your own core service. You essentially moved money from your left pocket to your right pocket, but you paid a vendor this huge fee for the privilege of doing it. And when you add a service, it absolutely must unlock a net new opportunity. It needs to capture a completely different demographic, or it needs to be a clear premium upsell that pairs with the existing treatment rather than just replacing it. And this brings us to the final and perhaps the most surprising strategic variable: the passion factor, right? When deciding what new treatments to add, you should seek out treatments that you and your team are actually interested in. For a strictly numbers-driven operator, I know it sounds kind of absurd. You'd think I don't buy a medical device based on whether the staff thinks it's cool, right? I buy it based on projected ROI. But the psychology of sales in a medical setting flips that logic completely upside down. So a great example, in my previous practices, I personally was always so interested in adding a sexual health and wellness program to the practice. But this is a highly intimate and sometimes intimidating category of services. And my team was pretty young. They were pretty immature when it came to discussions around arousals and vaginal rejuvenation. And if I would have added the services and bought a machine and added on inventory solely because the profit margin looked great on paper and because I was passionate about it, but my staff was uncomfortable discussing sexual wellness with patients, well, that machine would never be used. It would have been a huge waste of capital investments because the mechanics of the consultation are where the battle is won or lost. Patients in a medical practice, a medical spa, are highly vulnerable. They are discussing their deepest insecurities, and they have an incredibly attuned radar for hesitation. If a practitioner is just reading a script to push a new service because they were told to, the patient feels a lack of conviction and they will actually decline the service. But if the practitioner is genuinely fascinated by the science behind a new regenerative treatment, if they have seen the clinical trials and are genuinely excited about the outcomes, they don't even have to quote unquote sell it, right? Their enthusiasm acts as a transfer of confidence. The patient feels that certainty and they trust the provider and they book the treatment. The team's genuine intellectual curiosity is the actual engine driving the return on the investment. In fact, I believe it forces a complete reframing of what it means to run a successful aesthetic practice. Yes, the numbers have to work, but the spreadsheet is entirely subservient to the culture of the climate. It really is a masterclass in operational discipline. I mean, to thrive in this $25 billion landscape, you have to be comfortable saying no. You have to restrict yourself to dominating just 2 categories rather than being mediocre at 10. You have to look past the illusion of a high price tag and meticulously calculate the true cost of goods sold, avoiding the invisible bleed in those sneaky consumables. You have to treat vendor negotiations like high stakes, B2B acquisitions, hunting for the hidden cost and warranties, and contraindications. And most importantly, you have to protect your business from the cannibalization while keeping your staff deeply, deeply engaged. And if you zoom out, the playbook outlined here isn't just for medical spas. No, not at all. It is a fundamental stress test for almost any service-based industry. Whether you are running a boutique fitness studio, a specialized legal practice, or a high-end consulting firm, the physics of business are exactly the same. If you don't define your unique value proposition, if you let your vendors dictate your recurring cost, and if you treat your staff like interchangeable operators rather than domain experts, well, the math will eventually catch up with you. These principles are universal, but applying them to the medical aesthetic space specifically leaves us with a truly fascinating paradox to think about. What's that? Well, we started by looking at this massive industry, assuming the key to the gold rush was the technology, the perfect laser, the perfect injectable. But given everything we just uncovered about the passion factor and how enthusiasm actually closes the sale, it forces a radical question, okay? If a team's genuine excitement is the primary driver of clinic revenue, are you listening here? Because this is a big one. Okay. If a team's genuine excitement is the primary driver of clinic revenue, is the most crucial job of an owner not actually treating the patients? Perhaps the most difficult, the most important job of an owner is simply managing the dopamine and curiosity levels of their own staff. Wow. Keep them inspired, and the math takes care of itself. Just something to think about the next time you think about how you make a thriving business. If this conversation helped you think differently about your practice, share it with someone else who's building with intention. And if you're ready to go deeper, you'll find more resources, training, and tools inside Kairos Aesthetic Training. Until next time, I'm Taylor Siemens. Stay curious, take action, and trust the timing of your growth.